There are very few artists who have had as defining of a career as Earl Sweatshirt has. I've been trying to figure out how to do an intro for this video for the past like 30 minutes because I just can't condense how important Earl is in like a minute or two. From being in one of the most influential rap groups of all time to having a genre-defining solo career to paving the way for some of my favorite artists right now, Earl Sweatshirt deserves his flowers. But in almost a year of this channel's lifespan, I've never fully put the spotlight on the guy that truly made it possible for that kind of music to be somewhat mainstream. And with his album Live, Laugh, Love coming out today, I feel like there's not a better time to talk about him. So join me as I talk about the career of Earl Sweatshirt and what he has truly meant to music. But before we continue, if you don't know who I am, my name's Henry, I love music. This channel is where I talk about it. I upload a video every Friday about different topics in music, whether it's artists, albums, you name it, I've probably talked about it. I also do artist interviews, small artist reactions, and other fun stuff like that. So if any of those sound interesting to you, you should probably subscribe because I can't do it for you. But without further ado, Earl Sweatshirt. Where do we start? 2007. The technical start of Earl Sweatshirt's rap career was in 2007, where he went under a different name. Tebe Kosasile started rapping under the name Slide Tendencies in middle school, starting a group with some of his friends called the Backpackers and uploading his songs onto MySpace. Before you say anything about how I pronounce his name, I watched this news broadcast to make sure I was pronouncing it right. So I tried my best. The Slide Tendencies name would only be used for about 2 years until we were introduced to a very familiar face, Tyler the Creator. Tyler had actually discovered Earl by Earl reaching out to Tyler, telling him how much of a fan of his music he was. And through that interaction, they ended up becoming friends, and once he was invited to join Odd Future, Tyler's new rap group, he changed his name officially to Earl Sweatshirt. This would be a good time to educate you on where the name Earl Sweatshirt came from, because it's not just random. I mean, it's kind of random, but not as random as you think. An article by XXL magazine said that Earl had always been a fan of old people names and was a big fan of the artist James Pants. So, James Pants, Earl, Sweatshirt. You see where I'm coming from? Like I said, kind of random, but not as random as you might think. The first official release from Earl would come in 2010, where he released his mixtape Earl on the Odd Future website. Tyler, Haji Beats, Left Brain, and Vince Staples were just a few of the people that were on this debut mixtape. And similar to the records Bastard and Goblin by Tyler the Creator, the mixtape was very charged with its lyrics. The EP would never see a commercial release outside of the Odd Future website, but it would start the relationship between Earl and a lot of other artists he would continue working on throughout his career. Now, Earl's music career would come to a stop after this mixtape until 2012 for reasons that were out of his control. In an interview later on, Earl would confess that his mother had sent him to Samoa, to Coral Reef Academy, a place for at-risk boys for getting in trouble with his friends and other mental health reasons. Mental health struggles would be a defining fact about Earl as an artist in terms of how he expressed himself through his music. Later on through these albums, you will see that he was never shy to talk about what he was going through and how it affected him and how the music was helping him through it, which sort of became a staple in that genre that he pioneered, where artists that would make similar music would also not stray away from mental health topics. But in 2012, Earl would return from Samoa and be featured on the song Oldie from the Odd Future Tape Volume 2. This was the only contribution from Earl to this project, but it was very significant because it not only signified his return to Odd Future, but the return of Earl Sweatshirt in general. Earl would also be featured in the Oldie music video and would perform with Odd Future in March of that same year. In 2012, Earl would also start his own record label, Tan Crusada, which would be distributed under Columbia Records, with the main reason being a lot of the bigger record labels wanted him to stay away from Odd Future as a condition of their deals. So in order to stay close to them, he created his own label, which is very cool when you think about it. 2012 would also see Earl Sweatshirt featured on Super Rich Kids by Frank Ocean, and this song by Casey Veggies. Sorry, it's just a lot of letters. I didn't want to read it all out. Earl would also be featured on 2 songs from Damo Genesis and the Alchemist's collab album No Idols. Now this would be a very important collaboration because to my knowledge it was the first time Earl and the Alchemist had worked together, and if you know anything about music, you know that Earl Sweatshirt and the Alchemist work really, really well together. So I believe this is where it started. But now we're on to 2013, which would see the release of Earl's first commercial album, Doris. Now, right before the start of 2013, in November of 2012, Earl would release the single Chum, which would mark his first solo release since his return from Samoa. After announcing that the album would be called Doris and teasing it throughout the year, it would finally be released on August 20th of 2013. Doris is a very important album, not just for Earl as an artist, but for abstract hip-hop as a whole. In my opinion, it really cemented abstract hip-hop as a genre people were truly interested in, really playing off of a sort of minimalistic, sample-heavy production style with very, very deep and heavy lyrics, with Earl talking about things like his struggling relationship with his father. I feel like it was very important to Earl himself because not only was it his first album since his return from Samoa, but it was also mostly produced by him under his other name Random Black Dude. Also featuring production from people like Pharrell, Frank Ocean, and Tyler the Creator. But it was also just a great commercial start to what would be a very successful career from Earl. Plus, I know I don't really care about numbers, but the album did go number 5 on the Billboard 200, so that means something. Now, the gap in between Doris and Earl Sweatshirt's next album is somewhat uneventful. While he did release some more songs and collaborated a lot with The Alchemist, there was nothing super notable within those two albums. That was until March, where the pre-order for Earl Sweatshirt's next album, I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside, finally went live. The album releasing on March 22nd, Earl stated in an interview that he feels like this was truly his first album artistically because he feels like he can back up everything, the good and the bad. The album would be a return to the production style we saw on Doris, but to a more expanded extent. Earl would expand on his production abilities, making good use of this kind of dark and eerie production style he was known for, where he really gave himself the perfect beats to talk about what he talks about on there. John Dolan of Rolling Stone stated, "It's amazing that music this claustrophobic can be this engrossing." I feel like that really encapsulates what this album is. As can be interpreted with the name, this album kind of feels like the darkness finally peering back from the odd future aesthetic that Earl had been associating with this entire time. Going back inside and being surrounded by all these dark thoughts that he had been dealing with, feeling very claustrophobic, which the production does a really great job at signifying. Now, that album may come off as pretty dark and foreboding, but just a few weeks later, Earl released the 10-minute song Solace. Guys, isn't it crazy how Solace is the first song ever and the last song ever? It's really crazy, right, guys?
Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up.
Solace is a track, like I mentioned, that's 10 minutes long that has become kind of infamous from how creepy it sounds, featuring very freaky and distorted vocals with like different levels of haunting instrumentals through each part. I should have mentioned earlier, but the song divides itself into 3 different parts, and they're each just as interesting. This, in my opinion, has probably the darkest lyrics we'll see from Earl, and the way I see it is a very good representation of like mental rock bottom. I truly can't put into words how interesting this song is. You need to go listen to it if you haven't. But that's all I'm gonna say about that one. Happy thoughts, guys. Cut to 2015, where Odd Future would disband, Earl would fail to show up at Camp Flogna, and people speculating all kinds of different things between Earl and Tyler's relationship, with Tyler clearing everything up, saying they were all good, and Earl moving on with his career to create, in my opinion, one of the best rap albums of all time. Now, before we get there, I do need to mention the 2018 EP by The Alchemist, Bread, which has the song E. coli featuring Earl Sweatshirt, which is probably one of the most well-known songs with Earl on it. Good lord, that song is good. Holy. Now, you might realize I said 2018, and I had just mentioned 2015 when Odd Future disbanded. Why such the long gap? To be honest, it's kind of just a similar situation with the in-between of Earl's first 2 albums. Not much really happened between this time other than him being featured on a bunch of different songs. But this is the next most substantial part of his career, which is why I kind of jumped over. So also in 2018, after the release of a couple singles, the album Some Rap Songs by Earl Sweatshirt would release. Now, I mentioned that this is one of my favorite rap albums of all time, and one of the reasons I think this is the case is the production. At this point in time, Earl has become some sort of a master of this creepy, nostalgic production that he's known for. Utilizing old jazz samples, sometimes leaving them as is or just tweaking them slightly to keep you kind of on edge from the get-go. The distortion of old jazz samples to have this sort of creepy effect has become very infamous on Earl's own music, but also on works like Everywhere at the End of Time, where this sort of unsettling nostalgia keeps you on edge throughout the entire track. And while I do feel like that in particular was very prominent on Soulless, it's definitely very true here as well. But also you have some more light-hearted beats on this album like The Mint or Azucar. And while sometimes these songs still have some pretty heavy lyrics, I feel like this symbolizes Earl's outlook on them changing in a way. Seeing those times in his life as they are as very hard times, but realizing that he has grown from them. Or I could be completely wrong, you know, that's that's also a possibility. But the amazing production and Earl's resolve not to stay away from themes that other artists might cement this as just such a classic album. After this album, Earl would surprise release an EP called Feet of Clay, where he would also release a deluxe version later. There's nothing really super crazy to talk about with Feet of Clay other than it's still very good. After Feet of Clay came the year 2020, and what do we know happened in 2020? During this time, Earl would record the album Sick, which he would release 2 years later. I think Sick kind of expands on the outlook that Earl has been having on some rap songs in Feet of Clay, where despite the life that Earl has come from and the things he's seen and the thoughts that he's had, he's rose up from those and seen the success he's having now. This is not only reflected in the production, where the beats are a lot more upbeat and have more motion to them, but in lyrics as well, like on the song 2010, where Earl is talking about how he's come up from everything. I think Sick is a very underrated album, not just in the discography, but in terms of Earl's narrative throughout his career. Because I just want to point out and say, I saw everybody making fun of this tweet online a few days ago, talking about Earl's new album, and how it was going to be like a departure from Earl's super depressive rap style that he's had over the years. When in reality, like, Earl hasn't been rapping really depressive in a minute. I feel like he was pretty happy on Sick. Do we got our listening ears off, or like, what's going on here? Now, the next album that Earl would release was Voir Dire, his collab album with The Alchemist. Now, one of the very first videos I put out on my channel was about Voir Dire, where I talked about the album for like 20 minutes. And while I haven't watched the video in a minute, I believe all the information still holds up. So if you want like an in-depth breakdown of Voir Dire, go watch that, because it's really cool. But for sort of a Cliff Notes version, The Alchemist had stated at one point in time that him and Earl had an album together that they had just thrown out onto the internet under a fake name and just told people to go find it. But obviously it was never found. So in 2023, they started teasing the music for it together, and they would eventually release it under Gala Music. This like NFT music website, which was a choice, for sure. The album would later get a streaming release that was somewhat different from the Gala Music version, but was still very good nonetheless. Also, side note, this album was how I got introduced to Mike. I had no idea who Mike was before this until I went to the concert in Dallas for the Voir Dire tour, and I saw Mike open for Earl, and it was like the coolest experience in my entire life. It was wild. It was right after the release of Burning Desire, so like, oh. Sorry, this video isn't even about him. And after Voir Dire, that brings us to now, the present. Now, I obviously didn't cover everything that's ever happened in Earl's life, all the songs that he's been featured on, stuff like that. Earl Sweatshirt has been a part of a lot of different people's discographies. He has been a very outspoken activist, but throughout this entire career, he paved the way for what the modern day abstract rap scene would look like. With modern artists like Mike and Mavi taking very heavy inspiration from Earl and following the example that he had set, showing that music was a safe space to talk about your struggles, and it was even encouraged because Earl saw how many people related to the lyrics that he was putting out, and that became one of the defining features of that genre. But now we're just at a point in time where Live Laugh Love, his next album, is adding on to this already historic discography. Now, at the time of recording, I haven't listened to the album yet, but I'm sure you will see a lot of my thoughts on Instagram. I have not been able to shut up about this album since it was announced. But if it's coming from Earl, I know that the attention to detail is going to be on point, and he's going to talk about kind of whatever's just on his mind. And that's just the beauty of one of the greatest rappers alive. Alright, I think that's all I gotta say about Earl. He's had such a good impact on my music taste and my life in general. I needed to spotlight him, especially while his album was coming out. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe. You don't have to, I guess, but it would be really cool. Like I said, I post videos every week. I do cool stuff. I interview artists. I'm hopefully interviewing some more people soon, so that is going to be really cool. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys later. Goodbye.